If you're thinking of buying a wood-burning stove because you want to find an alternative fuel, especially while the cost of living is going up, I've got 10 thoughts that you might want to consider beforehand. My name's Richard Vobes and I've owned an Esse Ironheart for the last 5 years, and years ago I had a Rayburn, and I've come up with these 10 ideas of things that I wish I'd thought about before I'd started owning and using a wood-burning stove. Number 1. Now I know it seems obvious, but you need to have a chimney. Now some of the new builds may look like they've got chimneys, but they may not have chimneys at all, and it's something to think about, especially if you want to have a range in the kitchen or a stove in the front room. You're going to need a suitable chimney. Now I live in a Victorian terraced house, and there's a chimney here right in the right place in my kitchen, and of course a Victorian house was built with the idea of coal fuel fires, so it's perfectly fine. But in the UK these days, on a new installation, as far as I know, you need to have your chimney lined, and that may be an expense that you hadn't thought about when pricing up the cost of a stove. Number 2, do you live in a smoke-free zone? You may not have thought about this, but there are areas in which the type of fuel that you can burn is restricted. And of course, that's going to make a large impact on the expense of the fuel that you might want to use. There are smoke-free fuels, of course, but they're going to be more expensive than perhaps just basic coal or logs. Number 3. I've assumed we're talking about a wood-burning stove as opposed to a multi-fuel. And if it's wood, as I've come outside here, you might want to consider the type of wood that you want to burn. I burn ash and oak principally, but I can burn other things such as beech and birch. But there are some woods that are better and more productive than others. So it's always worth considering what is available from your nearest supplier. Number 4 is about the fuel and where it comes from. Who is your supplier? You have to think about where the fuel is coming from. It may be that if you live in the middle of absolutely nowhere and your nearest supplier is miles away, that the cost of them delivering it to you impacts so greatly on the cost of the overall fuel to use your stove that it really negates having one. So you need to find out who your supplier is on the type of fuel that you intend to use. I'm very lucky. I've got a log supplier who brings the logs to my door and lives only 5 miles away. Number 5, where will you keep your fuel? Seems a simple enough question, but if like me you have logs, I get 3 big bags of logs delivered at a time. It's more cost effective and easier that way, and I store them in the garden. That's quite a lot of logs, so you need somewhere to keep them dry so that they're not wet and of no use when you bring them in to use on the stove. So you need to have somewhere, and if it's raining and it's wet and you've got to keep going outside to access your fuel, that might put you off. If it's coal, it might be in a bunker or in a back room somewhere, or in sacks kept in a shed. But think about where you're going to keep the fuel. Number 6 is about the actual wood-burning stove itself. Do you want it to just heat a room, or has it got other potential? So my Esse Ironheart that I purchased 5 years ago, and the Rayburn that I had before that, did a number of different things. In fact, the Esse works better than my Rayburn did, because in the firebox there is a boiler, so I heat my water. Now I don't have central heating or anything like that, so I use my Esse all year round. It boils up the water and keeps it permanently warm, and it's very, very hot, I can tell you. It also, because this is pure metal, it radiates heat not only into the kitchen but into the lower floor of the house, which is very useful. I can cook on it, which is fantastic, and also I hang my clothes in the kitchen here because I don't have a tumble dryer when they're washed, and I use the radiated heat, so I save electricity in a whole load of different ways. But you may want a much simpler version of just heating up a room. But be aware that of course there are many uses for a wood burning stove. Number 7, going back to the fuel, sorry, these are in a bit of a random order. How is the fuel that you buy, i.e. say logs or coal, going to arrive into your garden? How will they physically get there? For example, I have my logs delivered to me and they come on a lorry with a crane, and the bags that they're in are lifted up over my fence and dropped into the garden. It's quite convenient for me. But some firms will deliver logs in the back of a lorry and it will just tip up and drop them where they are, possibly on the road or maybe on your drive, which then means you've got to manhandle them to wherever they go by either filling up buckets, carrying them by hand, or in a wheelbarrow, and that may not be very convenient. You may find, depending on the way your house and garden is structured, that you actually have to carry them through the house because there's no other way. So it's worth thinking about how you get your fuel to the place that you want to store it. Number 8, because a multi-fuel stove, I've been referring it to a wood-burning stove, but it could be a multi-fuel stove so that you've got coal or logs. It doesn't just immediately come out of the tap like gas or electricity out of the plug. The fuel has to be ordered, and you need to budget and think about how often you need to order your logs or coal, because often, unless you're incredibly lucky and you've found an amazing supplier, you have to think several weeks or months ahead. So the last thing you want is to run out of fuel and then think, oh, I need to order some more, and you ring up your supplier and they say, sure, I'll deliver next month. And you're thinking, but I'm going to be cold, can't be able to cook, and then you have to look for other sources, which can be very inconvenient and usually a lot more expensive. So it's worth thinking about in advance budgeting and ordering so that you never run out. Number 9, something else just to be aware of is if you're switching to a wood-burning stove or a multi-fuel stove, whatever it is, using that sort of primeval fuel, if you like, takes time to warm up. Unlike gas and electricity, it isn't sort of instant. So you have to give it time, and that's something that perhaps you need to think about. It's very easy to come in from work and just switch the heating on and wait for it to heat up relatively quickly, or jump into a shower and it starts off very quickly. With a multi-fuel stove, it all takes a little bit of time. It's worth it and it's lovely and all the rest of it, but you just need to budget a bit of time, whether you're cooking, whether you're heating the room, or of course if you're heating up a tank. And if you're heating up a tank from cold, it does take even longer. Whereas if you've used most of your water, it does kind of replenish quite quickly if you keep it going. And then you almost never run out of hot water. But from cold, yeah, it can take a bit of a while. And number 10, and I'm sure there are many more bits of advice that people can give you, the other thing to consider, and it's probably the most important thing, is whether it's log burning or multi-fuel, it's not absolutely clean. Electricity can come out clean out of the wire, so can gas. You're bringing in the fuel, whatever it is, into wherever you are, into your room, and you're storing some of it by the stove, you're putting it in, you're lighting it, you're dealing with fire, of course, which burns. So every time you open up the firebox, ash might come out. There is soot. Often, if it's a windy day, you might get a bit of smoke coming back. It all takes a bit of time to get used to. Every stove has its own idiosyncrasies, and it all takes a little bit of time, as I say. So my advice is never put a white carpet right in front of your wood-burning stove. Not unless you don't mind getting on your hands and knees and trying to clean it off with a cloth, or having a clip from the ear from your partner or something like that when embers fall out, or any of that. I've got tiles. Make sure you've got a suitable hearth to put it on so that it's safe and secure. You will of course need to clean out the chimney on a regular basis, once a year or once every 2 years, depending on how often you use your stove. And of course you may want to defer that to a professional, or like me, you can do it yourself. Cleaning out the stove is a regular thing in order to keep it in good shape and working order and to get the best heat out of it. You do need to clean that, of course, very regularly, and that is a messy job. So just be aware that it can be a little bit messy. You might want to wear gloves and put on a boiler suit or all those sort of things, or you might just be going, no, that's fine, I'm absolutely happy with that. If you would like to see what happened when my first experience with the Esse Ironheart came along and I had it delivered, check out this video here. It came without the back boiler in, which was a bit of a nightmare. And I've got other videos on my channel about the Esse Ironheart and wood burning stoves. Thank you for watching. I hope these views and ideas have been helpful.